I'm joined now by the co-host of Pod Save America and Pod Save the World and the former National Security Council spokesman for President Obama, Tommy Vietor. Tommy, thanks for joining me.
Brian, good to see you.
So I want to talk about the consequences of this bill that was just passed by the Republican Senate and the Republican House. Already, we have seen, even before the passage of this bill, for example, one community healthcare center in southwest Nebraska shut down. The CEO of that hospital, community hospital, came out and said, unfortunately, the current financial environment, driven by anticipated federal budget cuts to Medicaid, has made it impossible for us to continue operating all of our services. And so we're already seeing an instance where one hospital is shutting down just in anticipation of this bill. And so in terms of the broader consequences, is this a situation where you think that Republicans are going to be able to skate by in very much the same way that they've been able to skate by with unpopular legislation in the past because of how quickly the news cycle is, because of how they can obfuscate the reality surrounding it? Or do you think it's going to be impossible for them to escape the reality of this thing?
I mean, I think it's our job to make sure they cannot. I mean, I was pretty frustrated yesterday to see how much like the cable news channels were focused on the Diddy trial and then this murder case in Idaho. There was not a ton of coverage of the big, beautiful bill going through Congress yesterday. And so that's where I think like independent media outlets like you and like us over at Pod Save America are going to be critical. And also just the Democratic Party, like talking about this every single day until the midterm elections. Because to your point, I mean, that example you just raised, the Kaiser Family Foundation did a bunch of polling on the bill, and support for it dropped to 21% when voters were informed that it could decrease funding for local hospitals and lead to them shutting down. So if people hear that story, this is politically devastating, and that could get us beyond just sort of the 35 core targets that DCCC currently has. Hopefully we can expand that.
Do you think that we're in a political environment where we do have short attention spans and we do have short memories. I mean, I was thinking yesterday about the fact that when Roe was overturned, it felt like such a massive blow, and it was, but you know, we're the next presidential cycle saw Republicans gain full control of government.
Right.
And this is an immediate environment where not only are there not major consequences, but you can actually get rewarded for doing the worst, most depraved things. And that's what we're seeing right now. And so do you think that we are too far away? And I know we have agency in this, but is there some concern that we're far away? We have over a year until the next election. And while this might be very much in the zeitgeist right now, that they can kind of escape by virtue of the amount of time that's going to pass.
Yeah, look, I do worry a lot about that. I mean, you never know what can happen. There could be some sort of exigent event, you know, sort of a terrorist attack.
Right. I mean, look, in January of 2020, nobody thought that 60 days from then we would be in the midst of a global pandemic.
Exactly.
So you never know what's going to happen.
Exactly. You never know what's going to happen. Donald Trump always likes to fabricate like the latest caravan full of, you know, MS-13 guys who have Ebola or whatever right around an election. So they're going to try to change the subject to what they want. It's just incumbent on us to remind people what a piece of shit this bill is, right? Like $6 trillion in debt, according to the conservative Cato Foundation. Massive tax cuts for the richest people in the country, throwing 12 million people off of Medicaid. I mean, this is like a cataclysmic event politically. It's going to harm real people. People are going to die. Like 50,000 people a year are going to die because of this bill. And we need to be the ones who tell those stories. Republicans will lie and spin, and Trump will say, oh, no, I said no Medicaid cuts, and there's none in this bill. And just people are completely full of shit. We need to correct that.
What is the polling showing right now in terms of how much people actually know about what's in this bill? Just in terms of knowing how much work we have to do to get people aware of what's happening.
Yeah, so like in polls that look at approval of the bill, it ranges from 19 points underwater to 29 points underwater. So it's wildly unpopular. But Priorities USA did some polling that found less than half of Americans know anything about the bill, and only 8% of Americans could name Medicaid cuts as a detail of the bill they have heard about. So the most unpopular part of this thing is barely talked about.
Right. And I think that it's incumbent on us then, every opportunity we have to let people know that, yes, there are 17 million people who are going to lose their health coverage through Medicaid. 18 million kids are going to lose their access to school meals. We have food assistance is going to be stripped away to the tune of $300 billion. We're going to see 300 rural hospitals close, including the one that I just referred to before. We're going to see the budget explode to the tune of, you know, it depends on the estimates, but the one that you just cited before was $6 trillion. That's in addition to the $8 trillion that Republicans exploded the deficit during Trump's first term for the exact same thing, for these tax cuts. And it would blow up ICE's budget to the tune of, I think it would be if ICE was a military, they would have the 16th largest budget on earth.
It's terrifying.
They have a bigger budget than the militaries of a good portion of Western Europe, including countries like Brazil, Israel, Italy. And so that's what this bill does. And I think to your exact point, it's incumbent on us to make sure that people know it. But they have, I think one of the more insidious aspects of this is that they have included crumbs in this bill to be able to give themselves messaging opportunities. And so they'll be able, they're touting this idea that there's no taxes on overtime, no taxes on tip, and no taxes on Social Security. First of all, no taxes on Social Security does not exist. It is a figment of the Republicans' imagination. Fully made up. It is not in the bill. If anybody could find me that text, I would love to see it. And then as far as no taxes on tip and no taxes on overtime, those are minute provisions that are capped at $25,000 for tips and $12,500 for overtime. So these are still poverty wages that they're allowing before they start taxing again. And the provision sunsets in 2 years. So it's just enough time to while Trump is still in office that he can beat his chest about that. The second he's out of office, those things go away. And look, if they likely know full well that if a Democrat, first of all, is allowed to win in the 2028 election cycle, but if a Democrat wins, then all of a sudden, even the minute popular provisions of this bill go away, so that Republicans can say, "Hey, weren't things better when Daddy Trump was in office and you had all these provisions?"
The Daddy Trump stuff is so weird, man. Why are they doing that? Yeah, I mean, look, to your point, I mean, the people who are getting a tiny, tiny little tax cut on tips for their first $25,000 in income, they're very likely going to be losing benefits in the form of Medicaid or food assistance, right? Yeah. So those people are probably going to get harmed more than they get helped. Meanwhile, a married couple worth $30 million will no longer have to pay an estate tax. Right. They'll just pass all that money down to their kids. So those are the people that are actually benefiting. But the other thing that's helpful here, Brian, is there are district by district breakdowns of the impact of this bill already. Like David Valadao, California 22nd District, 65,000 people in his district are going to lose access to their health care. Yeah. 60,000 could lose access to food assistance. 3,612 energy jobs could be lost because it also guts tax credits for renewable energy. So the impact is real.
Yeah, and it's in these districts where, I mean, these frontline members, who many of whom have predicated their entire identity on protecting those Medicaid recipients, on making sure that the budget isn't exploded. These are the very people who ushered through this same bill. I mean, you have people like Lisa Murkowski who are trying to applaud the fact that she was able to make this bill less terrible by saying, okay, well, we were able to raise the rural hospital fund from $25 billion to $50 billion. But it's to offset damage that the same bill imposes. And so, like, if you're voting in favor of legislation that would strip $1.1 billion from Medicaid, but then also saying, like, hey, we're able to get like a few percentage points of that funding back, you don't get credit for making the thing that you are voting for less bad when you had the opportunity to just not vote for it. I mean, the example I like to use is like, this is the equivalent of her basically saying, I was able to secure fire extinguishers in this bill that would set the forest on fire.
Did you see the video of her? I think she got asked by like Ryan Nobles, maybe NBC News, about criticism of the bill and criticism of her vote. And she just stared daggers into his eyes.
For 10 seconds.
It's like just crazy. And then was just like so defensive, like she is the victim here, not the people in her state who are going to get thrown off their health care or going to lose food assistance.
And I think the saddest part is, I'm going to read an excerpt from the New York Times, and this is you'll be shocked about this, but this is Lindsey Graham speaking about Donald Trump. He likes hosting people; it relaxes him. He said that Mr. Trump told him he could go to the pro shop and pick out a shirt. So, like, this is who these people have debased themselves for. This is who they are currying favor for. This is who they're so fucking afraid of that they will throw their own constituents, millions of their own constituents, under the bus. This is who they'll strip lifelines, essential lifelines, away from, so that they can suck up to a guy who might give them a free fucking hat from the pro shop.
Lindsey Graham, there was a profile of Lindsey Graham a couple of years back by Mark Leibovich, where he just talked about how desperate he was to be relevant. And it just explains everything about Graham. You know, he is for whatever's happening. When John McCain was potentially going to be president, he was best friends with John McCain. When Donald Trump came on the scene, now he abandons McCain. Now he's a Trump guy. He's one of the saddest, most pathetic people in all of politics. What does he get out of this? I guess
a hat.
He gets a hat, and he gets to talk Trump into starting a war with Iran. Oh, that was fun.
Yeah.
What's happening to Ukraine, though? Oh, actually, they just cut off deliveries of incredibly important weapon systems like interceptor missiles, like the Patriot missiles that block Ukrainian cities from getting destroyed by Russian ballistic missiles and drones. We just cut that off. So, Lindsey Graham, you were the big Ukraine guy. You're the big, you're welcoming Zelensky to Washington, fighting for the Ukrainian military, pushing money their way. Now Trump's cutting them off.
Right. I mean, it's the same thing as Elon Musk, who's complaining about the impacts of this bill as far as clean energy and EV tax credits are concerned. Yeah, dude.
Yeah, buddy.
You got these people into power. You
Congrats.
Bankrolled this party.
You dropped $300 million.
You have somebody like Lindsey Graham who's doing the same thing, who's bolstering the profile and kowtowing to a guy who is acting in a way that is completely antithetical to all of Lindsey Graham's purported values.
Yep.
And I think that's the sad reality of what Trump has done to so many people. He has basically gotten them on record showing that they stand for nothing at the end of the day. You have the House Freedom Caucus who pretends that who pretends that their whole thing, their whole raison d'etre to be in Congress is that they want to make sure that we don't explode the deficit and balloon the debt so that future generations of Americans are not saddled with bills that we can't pay off. And yet they ushered it through, certainly bigger than anything those communists on the left like Barack Obama and Joe Biden were putting through. And now their names are all over the thing. So what do you stand for at the end of the day if it's not the very things that you are in Congress to do?
Well, maybe the number one example is J.D. Vance, who cast the tying vote that got this bill passed by the U.S. Senate. This is a man who came up as some sort of populist working man's hero, talking about Mima and Peepaw, and he had his book. And now he tweeted the only thing that mattered in the bill was the money for ICE. That everything else, including quote the minutia of Medicaid policy, is immaterial. So I guess by minutia he means throwing 10 to 12 million people off of Medicaid. That's minutia now.
Right. There was a quote from Republican lawmaker Derek Van Orden. He said, I guess he was getting defensive because people were accusing the Republicans of just basically being a wholly owned subsidiary of Donald Trump. And so I don't know where anybody would get that idea.
Yeah.
But Derek Van Orden said, the president of the United States didn't give us an assignment. We're not a bunch of little bitches around here, okay? I'm a member of Congress. I represent almost 800,000 Wisconsinites. I want to tell you, one of his next tweets was, I am standing with real Donald Trump and the one big beautiful bill. Once again, we have some pretendicons backstabbing President Trump. No bueno.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, he is one of a bunch of members of Congress who all said they would absolutely not, under any circumstances, vote for something that included Medicaid cuts.
Cut two.
Here we are.
Yeah. I think there were two people who voted against it. It was like Brian Fitzpatrick and Thomas Massey.
Yep.
That's it. Everybody else was perfectly content. And so now that people are looking at this, what is your, look, you work at Crooked Media, host Pod Save America and Pod Save the World. What is your focus now as it relates to this bill as we, head toward midterms here, which again are more than a year away?
Yeah, I mean, I think the insidious thing about this bill is that a lot of the impact is going to be delayed until after the elections.
Yeah.
And so we just have to make sure people understand what was voted on and what was coming. And it's pretty frustrating that this is getting rammed through July 4th weekend. The people were more focused on the Diddy trial than they were on what was happening in Washington. So it's incumbent upon us.
To the Democrats' credit, the fact that Hakeem Jeffries was able to stand on the floor and speak for almost 9 hours meant that the Republicans could not vote on this bill at 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
It meant that they had to vote on this bill, in broad daylight. And that's, one, I mean, hardly a silver lining, but at a bare minimum, it's what we should be doing.
Look, I appreciate the hustle.
Yeah.
Good for him. I couldn't talk for 9 hours straight. I'm glad we're talking about this thing in the middle of the day and not in the dead of night. But it's going to be a long time between now and the midterms, and we're going to have to talk about this every day, constantly, and make sure that all these frontline members own this thing.
Yeah, and one step that we all can take in terms of making sure that voices like Tommy's and your co-hosts at Pod Save America are elevated in this ecosystem is, if you're not yet subscribed to Pod Save America's YouTube channel, I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. These are the voices that we need to lift up so that when people come onto YouTube, come onto these social media platforms looking for information, that they are not immediately sorted to right-wing sources. So again, I'll put that link on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Tommy, appreciate your time.
Thanks, buddy.